Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Pacific Coast Archaeological Society October meeting. Our speaker for tonight is David Lee. He'll be speaking on seeing rock art through the eyes of the elders. Quick introduction here. David Lee is an independent rock art researcher focusing on the function and context of Native American rock art of Western North America and the rock art and associated traditional knowledge of Northern Australia. He is a founding member and general manager of Western Rock Art Research, a nonprofit organization located in Bishop, California, dedicated to the documentation, study, and management of rock art. He has recorded rock art in California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, Idaho, and Australia, and has co-authored several papers and reports on the Mojave Desert, Eastern California, and Australia, and one very good book, I might add. Perhaps more. Between 2005 and 2017, he and his wife, Charlotte, worked with the Wardaman people of Northern Territory to document their art sites and associated traditional knowledge. And with that, I give you David Lee.
Thank you. I will start sharing my screen. Does that work for everybody?
Yes, that's working.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. We will just get started now. I hope everyone's having a great evening. Before I get started, there are just 3 points I'd like to make. First is that I am not an indigenous person. I'm neither Wardaman nor Paiute. And while I'm going to do my very best to be faithful to what I was taught by Bill Harney and others in Northern Australia, please keep in mind that it is all filtered through my own personal Eurocentric worldview. So keep that in mind. Second, I'm only just scratching the surface. I've spent 10 field seasons. My wife and I spent 10 field seasons recording everything that Bill Harney, an elder, wanted to share with us. And I understood then, and I understand now, that we were only just barely scratching the surface, and there was only a small percentage of the knowledge that he had that he felt comfortable sharing with uninitiated people, and only a small portion of that we had time to learn. Beyond that, remember that whenever you're learning anything about a group of people, a culture, or even an individual in an hour, it's vastly oversimplifying whatever it is that you're talking about. We people are extremely complex beings, so keep all this in mind, please. And before I get started, I would like to give a big thank you to the Wardaman people of the Northern Territory of Australia for everything I learned from them and from being out on their country for so long. There's so much that you can learn by being out on other people's country, especially learning from them about it. And the same goes for the Paiute Shoshone people here, whose land I'm sitting on right now. I'd like to thank them for, again, all the same things. I'd also like to give a big thanks to the Pacific Coast Archaeological Society. We go back a long, long ways. What was that? 30 years ago or more that PCAS published the first real report I ever had anything to do with. I would also like to thank all the supporters, the people who have helped us as a nonprofit get so much work done here in the United States and also in Australia. And I'd really like to thank all of you for taking time and having interest in our work enough to spend the evening with us here tonight. So, like many of you, I'm sure, my wife Charlotte and I fell in love with being out on country first. And it's there that our real love of archaeology in the past grew, because we would come across all the clues that they had left in their passing. And particularly for me, the rock art really resonated. And here in the Owens Valley, up at the top of the White Mountains, there is where we met and got to spend an awful lot of time working for White Mountain Research Center. The Owens Valley, I think most of you have probably been up here in the Eastern Sierra, is east of the Sierra, between there and the White Mountains, is a very dry valley, but with just enough rain, it really becomes just an Eden with flowers everywhere, as I'm sure many of you know as well. We also have a huge amount of rock art, really a world-class collection of rock art that, despite being really varied and complex, it all really falls under the heading of what we've come to call as the Western archaic tradition, what we used to call the Great Basin abstract. And there are a lot of different faces of it, but it all basically falls under this one umbrella of mostly what we would call non-figurative images, with a very small percentage of what we just call figurative images. My wife and I were offered positions down in the Granite Mountains, where some of you remember us from, and we worked down there for 13 years. And we were exposed to an amazing amount of rock art right from the beginning. Well, and the natural resources as well were quite a bit different from what I was used to here in the Owens Valley. Charlotte had lived in a lot of places around the United States and around the world, and not much would surprise her, but it was really opened my eyes a lot. And particularly how the rock art was so similar to what is up here, 200 or 300 miles away, the same rock art, and continues all the way up into the northern Great Basin where it turns into the Columbia Plateau. At the Granite Mountains, we ran into the man who really changed our lives, just like he changed in the lives of hundreds or even thousands of people and inspired them to get up and go try to get something done. Our fearless leader, Don Christensen, who I think has documented more rock art in North America than almost anybody else I can think of. And he's mostly well known now for his work in the Southwest, although we worked for a long time with him in the Mojave and then followed him out to the Southwest and did quite a bit of work there with him as well. If you don't own this book on the rock art of the Grand Canyon, you should order it right away and get a copy, because it is the best book on American rock art, in my opinion. And I am obviously completely unbiased on the whole thing, but it's based on 25 years or so of intensive documentation of sites on both rims of the Grand Canyon and into the Grand Canyon as well. And after working together as a team for 10 years, in 2006, we formed a very small but very effective nonprofit group called Western Rock Art Research, and have been working for the BLM, Forest Service, Park Service, University of California, and as I'm sure most of you know, documentation is a lot more than just putting an X on a map and taking photographs. To do it right, it includes really accurate maps. A whole lot of other information needs to be recorded, measurements, the physical and cultural context, photographs, if you have time and resources, accurate scale drawings. And all of this is to be able to collect whatever data you can from the site and put it into a context. The biggest word in science, in all disciplines of science, in my opinion, is this word context. Because the question that Don was really looking for, and that we followed in his footsteps, learning, is what else were people doing here besides making the rock art? That seems to be a more interesting question to me, because then it leads into how did the images fit into the lives of their makers? Which, again, it's a much more important question than what did that element mean, which, in my opinion, is a question that ignores a lot of what we've already learned about rock art. So what we did is we formed teams and went out with a lot of other friends and colleagues to record and do survey, recording not only the rock art, but also other associated archaeological sites, to put everything into as big a as good a representation of the context as we could. Most of the rock art we've worked on has been very faint and hard to see and takes a lot of time to do a real good drawing of, but even rock art that is pretty noticeable, pretty bright, there's still an awful lot of details that can come out when you do drawings of it. Admittedly, it's not easy to always have the time and resources to do drawings, but if it's at all possible to have a full documentation of a site, I strongly recommend doing drawings. These are a couple panels from up in southwestern Utah around St. George. So these are the areas and the numbers of sites that we recorded working together, in addition to all those sites in the southwest and around the Grand Canyon, specifically that Don and Jerry and others worked on. These are the other places that we worked with them and by ourselves and in smaller groups. And most of the talk obviously is going to be on those 160 sites in Northern Australia. When we started, first thing is to read all the literature, and I found that there were all these assumptions that people who had not done much recording had made about the rock art, that when I went out and really knuckled down at trying to find all the details of a site, I was finding that these were all wrong, that the only way to make a case for any of this is to ignore a large amount of the data that's out there on the ground. So it made a whole lot more sense to go collect the data ourselves than rely on what it had done before us. Although there has been an awful lot of very, very fine recording projects since we started as well. And I mentioned, here's the Mojave rock art. And all the similarities that there are between it and moving up into the Great Basin to the north and to the east. But it's really more than that, because while there are a lot of differences, there are also great similarities between rock art all over the world. And in particularly for different reasons, Australia. Here's a bunch of examples, a few examples of rock art from the Red Center in Australia. As you can see, it's not that different from what we have here in the Mojave and the Great Basin. I have other talks on YouTube that you can see that I go into this in a lot more detail, but that's just a little hint at why I believe that it makes a lot of sense to be studying rock art globally to figure out things on a local level. So this is where the talk turns into talking specifically about Australia. And in 2005, we were invited along with our friend Amy Leska to join Jeff Lefebvre, as all of you I'm sure know. He recently wrote and published the best book on world rock art that has ever been written. And you probably knew him much before that, but it's his fault for everything that follows at this talk. We would have never gone to Australia if he hadn't invited us to go on the greatest trip of what turned out to be for us the greatest trip of a lifetime, part one. And it was an amazing time. Part of that is that we had heard about this elder in the Northern Territory, not far from Darwin, who had grown up in the shelters that his ancestors had lived in for at least 15,000 years, probably much, much more than that. And that he had a lot of traditional knowledge that he was willing to share with people. We were so lucky to be able to track him down. And Senior Wardaman Elder Yidumduma Bill Harney is an artist, a musician, a statesman, an activist. He's a national treasure, and we were so fortunate and gifted to be able to spend so much time at his request to go and learn about all of these different rock art sites and all of his knowledge about it. upon meeting him and finding out what we did, he asked if we would help him to record these sites and his associated knowledge of them. We jumped right into it, and I never even dreamed that I would meet anyone who knew such intimate detail of everything to do with this homeland, with this country, the country of his ancestors. We were also very fortunate that during those 10 field seasons, we were able to meet and spend some time learning from other people and other elders. Senior Garnburu Elder Alan Young, seen here, is from a adjoining group of people to the Wardaman. And then a little further away down towards the deserts is the Walpuri people, and Wanta Stephen Patrick. We got to spend some time with him as well, and getting to see these elders talk about it, being asked to record these elders talking about how their stories and how their songs interwove with each other, and basically amount in their view to just one giant song and one giant story that covers across the whole continent, that each of their language groups just has a part of, that they all fit together. We were also very lucky to be able to go out with other anthropologists and land managers with these elders. And again, we're asked to record, and also with, in this case, it was an Australian broadcasting company that was recording him, and Bill asked us to record the conversations as well. We also were asked to go along when Bill went out with other elders to talk about and point out and name and give the stories for different places on the landscape. This is a quote about Bill Harney from a land claim legal case in 1976. One of Bill's fathers was Joe Jormanji, who also is what they called a boundary watcher, whose job was to know all of the boundary sites around each of the clan estates, the family clan estates, and how they interact with, as well as all the interior sites for each clan estate and how they interact with everything else. So Bill has a lot more knowledge than perhaps an ordinary person would have. We expected in 2 years, which is all we thought we could afford, to be able to record as many of the paintings and engravings as we could for Bill and the Wardaman people, to try to understand their connection to the sites and to see how it fit into their daily life. But that was not at all what Bill had in mind. It turned out that he had the whole thing planned out, and he felt that he had to teach us at least something about all of these other details of traditional life for us to really be able to understand anything at all about the images or about the sites themselves. And the way all of those different things fit into what we've come to call the dreaming and the dream time, which are not the best translations, but it's really all we've got, which basically he wanted us to try to understand a little bit about everything he knows about Wardaman Country that he's ever learned, including stars. And there's also a deal about time, that time is much more fluid to the Wardaman people than it is to us. It's not a linear thing at all. It's going on all the time. The past can be the present, can be the future. It's very confusing to outsiders. This is a quote by one of the earliest anthropologists in Australia. I believe it would have been in about the late 40s or 50s, concerning rock art and images. And this is another much more recent quote from a very, very good friend, Ben Gunn, very recently, about just how multi-layered these images really are. So everyone who is in Australia who has studied rock art has been told, or images that are still used by contemporary Aboriginal people, that very simple images can have many different interpretations or explanations for them. The vast majority of them, and all researchers, including us, were told that those are only the unrestricted meanings, that there are lots of other meanings that you're only told later on throughout life at these sites as particular stories are related to you and information is imparted to you. So Australia, like America, has many different rock art concentrations. Across the top end, there are 4 really big ones in particular, and I've been super fortunate to be able to work in 3 of them and also to visit the Cape York Peninsula a little bit that first year. But in Arnhem Land in particular, we were able to join these amazing people, again, very inspirational people who have touched lots of people's lives and inspired a lot of us to do better. Robert Gunn, Ben Gunn, and his wife Lee are amazing people and amazing scientists and great friends, good mates. For 5 of the seasons that we went to Australia, we were invited along onto the helicopter to go help them in Arnhem Land, but they really didn't need our help. They are an amazing team that gets an incredible amount of work done. Particularly, Ben is very well known for this technique he has for really pulling out all the different various levels of overpainting that goes on in the top end of Australia. In 2017, I was also invited to join the Kimberley Visions Project up on the King George River in the northern Kimberley, and that was an amazing adventure as well. And all of that allowed me to understand the context for the Wardaman rock art and to see how it all fits into a much bigger whole. So moving completely back onto Wardaman Country, in 2006, after meeting Bill in 2005, we came back to start recording. And of course, he put us on the biggest and most complex site right away, wanted that one done first. And our friend Brian Birdsall came and helped us, and he's still helping us today, getting the volumes published. We record the sites with not doing drawings, but beyond that, taking measurements, doing maps, recording anything that's associated. And then when Bill was able in his busy schedule to come back and join us and set up a camera and videotape him saying everything he wanted to relay about the site and about each individual panel and or image. And a bunch of our friends and colleagues from over here came and joined us. Here's Carol Ormsby and Steve Schwartz. On one year, they came and helped us out a bunch. Here is Janet Leverwood, who also came and helped us out and has been a big supporter of us for a very long time. Those are depictions of rainbow serpents behind her. Here is John and Sheila Harmon, who came over one year and helped us as well. And of course, you all know Marglyph. Hello, Marglyph. She came and really helped us get 3 really big sites done one year, and also joined us on the helicopter to go up and with Ben and Lee to go help on sites in Arnhem Land. It was an amazing year. This is Brent McCausland from Tasmania, the Tassie Tracker, we named him, who an amazing bushwalker and good friend of Bill Harney's since the 80s, really, when he worked there on an adjacent station, on that station, I believe, as well. And he would head out in front of us, locating heaps and heaps of little sites for us to get recorded, as well as the ones that we could get Bill to. Now, because Bill could only make it to about 50 of the sites that we recorded, we had the opportunity to re-record him as he went to the same site over and over with different types of groups of people, where he would relay the same stories, but accenting different facets or details of the stories, particularly when there were young people present. For instance, in this case, the stories would be more focused on the right ways to behave and punishment, or how to be taught to do the right thing. So the whole purpose of all this was to come up with a complete narrative report for each of these sites with all the words of Bill Harney linked to the images, the rock art panels. And we're still working on that. We're getting quite a few of them done. We would camp out for about, on average, about 10 days at a time is what we shot for. As you can see, we were really roughing it. We figured out how to come up with a pretty comfortable, happy little camp, but there were certainly a lot of sacrifices and hardships that we had to put up with. Yes, that is a prawn that we just had bought along the road from a fisherman who had caught him the day before. We also learned an awful lot about how to pack 10 days worth of food and water and recording supplies into camping and recording supplies into one vehicle. There were no people out on the country where we were working, but we never felt very alone. It was always seemed like there were a lot of neighbors. What amazing country with amazing wildlife. The birds, anyone who has been to the Australia and spent much time in the bush, especially the top end, and I think many other parts of Australia, can never forget the birds. Also, there's a lot of other cool stuff in Australia that we don't have here that really makes it easy for you to feel that the spirits are still alive in the country, and they are here and everywhere else. It's just that they're still named and they're still talked to and they're still considered to be alive on the country there, and they are here as well to the indigenous people, but not so much to those of us that don't have that tradition. We, after 3 years of renting a vehicle, we realized we could not afford this any longer, and we finally bought this vehicle, and we only were able to do that because we made these incredible mates in Australia, the most generous and giving people you could imagine, who took care of our vehicle for 8 field seasons that we kept up and had that truck to use. They have been able to make a living their entire life off of their art and their music. They have this band MD. Shay, in addition to being a musician, is also a jeweler and a jewelry maker and a painter and a healer. And Mark is giving these concerts to a lot of big shows throughout Australia. You can go online and learn about them. And we were so fortunate to have them as friends. On this trip that they made down to visit us on Wardaman Country, we were there while a group of students and researchers from Africa had come over, and here they are doing a traditional Wardaman tune. Never before seen concert there, except for that handful of folks from Africa that were there. So Wardaman Country is not the kind of country that I would have thought I would have fallen in love with. At first glance, it seems like it's very, very flat. Until you really look close and develop eyes, you think that the vegetation is very similar, but it turns out it's not. There's a lot of complexity to this country. It looks flat, but there are a lot of these tall escarpments and outlying rocks like this, and deep gorges with creeks and billabongs and rivers running through them that were all created back in the Dreamtime, back in the time of creation. In Wardaman Country, many of the waterholes here, it's well known as the headwaters of the 5 major rivers of this part of Australia. And many of these here were made by these 2 old ladies back in the Dreamtime with their digging sticks. This is water python and black-headed python, who dug out, again, a lot of these rivers and gorges. This is the Victoria River, one of those 5 main ridges that feed that whole top end of the Australia there. Bushfires are a real part of annual life there. And like I said, Bill knows this country intimately in ways that I had no idea anyone ever did. One year he asked us if we would film him drawing a map. We got him a big piece of poster board. He took a charcoal stick and drew the station where they live and about 100 springs all around the station in less than 2 hours. He named all of these, told how you walk from one to the other, their names sometimes in several languages, what dreamings went through there, what beings are associated with it, which resources are there, what the physical attributes are of it, what the water quality is. So Wardaman Country is here in the top end of Australia. It's one of the emptiest places in the world still. And Darwin is, I think of it as about the size of Lancaster, Palmdale. The only other town really that you'd call a town is Catherine. I'd say it's maybe as big as Ridgecrest. Wardaman Country, this is not an exact at all line around, but it's approximately 100 miles in diameter. And one year, Bill asked us if we would come and record him, videotape him talking about all of the boundary sites for each of these 12 estates, clan estates of Wardaman Country. And that was a long, long day of videotaping. The next day, he asked us to come back and do all of the interior sites for each of those and relay them all the way back to all of those boundary sites. And we came up with these maps of, this is a map of the various clan estates and another map that we have of about 300 different sites in those 2 long days that he explained in depth everything about them, how to get to one to the other, everything else that he had done in that map of the springs. Not all of those sites have rock art, though. This is Rainbow's, the tip of Rainbow's tail that was chopped off and is turned to stone here one of the times that the rainbow serpent was killed. On one trip, we were told that the money had been procured to be able to take elders out on a helicopter for 2 weeks. It didn't take long for that to get turned into 2 days. And a number of land managers and anthropologists and other folks came to take these elders out and match up everything that Bill knew and other elders knew with the maps that they had before. As you can tell from his expression, Bill was very impressed by their GPSs and cameras and maps and everything. But when he got in the helicopter, it was their turn to be impressed because he could point in any direction and really, really blew the helicopter pilot's mind that he knew everything over such a huge area. And I was given a chance during this time to watch him with other anthropologists, and I noticed that he follows sort of a routine when he's talking about sites. When he starts talking about a site, he'll describe it, its physical attributes and what it's like and the water and whether what kind of site it is. And then he'll describe how you walk from one to the next, even though he's driven and ridden horseback and over with helicopter. And then he'll usually give something about a historical story or a Dreamtime story having to do with that site. And more often than not, he'll link it back to himself and talk about how it's his dreaming there, or it's his auntie's dreaming, or the reason for why he has these stories or this knowledge about the site. And I believe that that's one facet of this thing that we've given the name the dreaming, which in Wardaman is called Buraja. So Bill understands evolution and all modern thoughts of science, but he really believes that on a spiritual level, he was born into the grasshopper family. And he has a direct connection to grasshoppers and all of their cousins. And he believes that it's just more knowledge than we have, that he understands the line, like I said, of evolution, but to him, the stories of the creation have a lot more to do with his tie to the land than anything else. For instance, with the grasshopper, at the very first ceremony, at the very beginning, grasshopper he had a song to make wind and straw for the people in that very first ceremony. These are the other dreamings that Bill was either born into or inherited in many different ways throughout his life. As you can see, not all of them are birds or animals. His mother, Ludi, her main dreaming was the white cockatoo or the sulfur-crested cockatoo, Mengen in the Wardaman language. And here are some of the other dreamings, again, that his mother was either born into or came into inherited during her life. This is the main white cockatoo site, or one of the main white cockatoo sites on the Mengen property. And in addition to the characters, the Mengen, these are clapsticks on the left there, and stone tools that are in the headdress there, and they all have symbolic meanings as well. Nearby, there's another site that's very important to the white cockatoo dreaming. These are other depictions of the white cockatoo beings, ancestral beings. That everything in the universe began with a sound or a song. I love that song. This is Butcher Bird, kind of like our shrike here. Butcher Bird, back in the Dreamtime, had a song to make clapsticks out of the mud. Everything was just mud back at the very beginning. He had a song to make clapsticks. This is Longtail Pheasant. He had a song to take that mud, make a tube, and turn it into a didgeridoo. And this is little Pee-wee. Pee-wee always been a dancer, and he taught people at that first ceremony. He's one of the birds that taught people how to dance. These are depictions of them back in the Dreamtime, dressed up for ceremony. And Wardaman people, traditional Wardaman people, believe that no humans originally painted these, that these are the images that, like the shadows of these beings, that when their world turned into our world at a special time, they put their images or their shadows into the rock, and their spirits went into the rock, went into the country to take care of it. And all of those beings turned into the birds and animals and plants that we know now in Australia on Wardaman Country. This is a very long wall. I think it's 24 feet or something long, mainly depicting baby lightnings and their teachers. It was repainted by Bill and his cousin in the 80s, partially repainted while they were told by their elders to take children there, show them the special ceremonies that you do before you repaint or upgrade these paintings. They don't believe that anybody should paint something new, but they are supposed to, during Bill's generation, upgrade one painting, pick one that really needs it and upgrade it. And they tried to do this. The problem is that it has to be done during the wet when all the roads are impassable with mud. This site also has a woman's business component to it as well. The site can be used for ceremonies for both men and women, but there are special times when part of it is used just for sacred women's business and another part that's used just for sacred men's business. But the stories that we were told here about these baby lightnings were, again, only the stories about these images that we are allowed to be told. We're very well aware that there are other more secret, sacred stories that we were not allowed to be told about them. And this is the men's part of the site at the other end of the overhang that we were allowed to be told the stories about, and it's in the site record. Again, though, I'm quite certain we weren't allowed to be told everything that was only for the initiated. Wardaman Country is also known because, unlike a lot of the other places that have rock art, there is a huge amount of engravings, petroglyphs, and incised lines in Wardaman Country, literally just hundreds of thousands of lines. And also, like there is in other parts of Australia, a lot of tracks and footprints of birds, humans, other animals, kangaroos, and also some depictions of anthropomorphic and zoomorphic figures as well. If we had time, it would have been really nice to do drawings of particularly the fainter things. And in a lot of Australia, that's what they're working on. They have to fight for funding there as well, but they're much better funded to do research on rock art in Australia than we are over here. Much of the rock art has covered over with mineral concretion, and we believe it goes back. I believe they came up with at least 15,000-year-old dates for some of the rock art engravings that had been knocked and covered over at the base of panels like this. Now, Bill doesn't get upset at anything, but he's very tired of people saying that these are tool sharpening grooves, and he would like me to ask any archaeologist in Australia to show him just one tool that anyone might be using that would not be dulled by running it through grooves like this. He knows of none that would be sharpened. To him, these are all the ceremonial markings that were on those beings back in the Dreamtime, that when they went into the wall, those markings went in onto the wall as well when they went into the rock. Nowadays, when people make those ceremonial scarification on themselves, they call it copying the dreaming onto their bodies. For instance, this is a big boulder at a site called Yidumduma that's a redback kangaroo dreaming. And all of these lines on these boulders likely help to tell stories having to do with this particular site, and all the stories concerned with not only the rock art here, but also the physical attributes of this site. Like it has this overhang with an arch in it, a double arch, that is an important part of a Dreamtime story. These boulders, the one on the right is about 2 meters tall. They're huge, completely covered boulders, covered with engraved lines. And for Bill and the kids of his generation, elders set them down here, and these were used to tell stories about funerary practices, how to take care of a person's body when they die, how to tell whether they were killed with sorcery or not, a whole lot of other things about their beliefs about death and rebirth. They actually have quite a big belief in reincarnation in different fashions. So this is just my opinion right here, obviously, but I do not think that images, most rock art images, either here or in Australia, were ever meant to be read like a book, like we want to be able to decode them. I think that they were used to help tell stories. And that's a lot bigger difference than you might think. If you stop and really think about it, this is not pre-hieroglyphic symbolism. So here is a site that has these beautiful big concentric and spoke circles that I've seen a lot of other archaeologists or rock art people say, well, these are clearly astronomical symbols, but Bill, again, and other children of his generation were brought here to learn about men's laws, women's laws, and in the middle, the laws that we all have to live by. And I don't see how we would have ever come to that conclusion without having specific traditional knowledge about this site. And so you see these type of elements, usually only one, occur at a number of other sites, and they have to do with what kind of either men's or women's laws are important to this particular site. These strange little three-part anthropomorphic figures, again, you only find one of them at a few different sites. And Bill says that whenever you find them somewhere, it means that part of the story has to do with finger talk or sign language. Daga daga had to be used for people to understand each other. And in the Northern Territory, in that part of the world, you hold up three fingers like this if you don't understand what someone's saying, and then you switch over to sign language to talk. Sometimes it's what we would call natural features, or what seem to be very small or insignificant things that have a big part to play in the stories that are being told. In this case, the image on the left is about a meeting place where people who are fighting, two different groups of people, the Wardaman and the Jamanjunk, met here, or it might have been the Galiwuru, I forget, at this particular site. And they resolved their differences, made up, and this is an image of a site, or Yidumduma, where they said that you're in my heart now and we're brothers and the fighting is over now. This is a site that has what we would call as a natural hole in the roof of the cave where the snakes chased another being up and he took off through the roof of the cave, and several miles away he landed and his foot is still sitting there, as you can see, with the 5 toes. We were never told that the footprints were just about animals that were being hunted, or that the pictures of animals were just depictions of food or animals that were being hunted. We were always told, as other researchers in Australia are, that these images have to do with stories about how the birds and animals interacted with each other in the Dreamtime and developed personalities and traits that still inform how they interact with each other today and how they interact with people, and are such an important part of, every one of them is such an important part of the landscape. This is an incredibly beautiful painting and an incredibly beautiful site. This is possum dreaming, and this is a depiction of possum. And back in the very first ceremony, when all of the animals got together, all of the beings got together, the possum and the fella on the left on the bottom over here, Bandicoot, they each had songs that when they put it together and sang these songs, they were able to produce the first food for all the people at that first ceremony, because there was nothing else growing, nothing else that they could use as food. Nothing had been agreed upon or even named at that point. So they came up with this food that is this scale that you find now on the back of eucalyptus leaves everywhere, pretty much, that the aphids make, that the ants raise and farm, have like a ranch with the aphids that are tending these crops of this very, very sweet, high energy food that's considered to be like bush candy that people, kids, all the birds and animals enjoy eating when it comes on really heavy. And here's a picture, here's a little video of white cockatoo scraping it off with his beak and eating it. In the very beginning, there were no rocks or trees or anything. The earth was really just a moving mud-like surface that was surrounded by the sea. And this is at the very beginning of creation in Australia, according to the Wardaman people. And the first being was a female being that came up out of the earth, out of the mud, called Yidumduma, who was related to frogs, the mother of everything. And she met her first husband, who was swimming around in the ocean, the rainbow serpent. They got together, became husband and wife, and all of their children are everything to do with water. He went back into the ocean, and later this tall man, Nardi, came down from above, from the sky boss, and he became Yidumduma's husband, and all of their children are all of the beings of land. This obviously Rainbow serpent was not happy with that. He flooded the earth. There's long stories having to do with that. Nardi protected everybody by being very tall and could lift everybody up, raising up the mountains high above the waters and protecting everybody by taking them on high. There are different kinds of illustrations at different sites of the same beings. They're used to tell these stories. These are rainbow serpents. There's more than one rainbow serpent. To the Wardaman, not to all the people of this part of Australia, but to the Wardaman, the main rainbow serpent is a male being, a original creation being. There are also female rainbow serpents that are his wife or wives. And this is the main rainbow serpent dreaming site in Wardaman Country. Yeah, the rainbow serpent on the left, the male is, I think, again, 20 some odd feet long. The whole panel is quite a bit more than that. Rainbow serpent's wife is on the right there. It's a fantastic site, takes quite a bit to get to, but there are also an awful lot of historical paintings here as well, showing cattle, horses, equestrian figures. There's things on the lower left there were flying foxes, or here they're fruit foxes, flying foxes, fruit bats, that are usually depicted as being upside down and hanging. They always are in Wardaman Country, but occasionally in other places in the Kimberley, they're depicted with their wings out, but not very often. Usually they're depicted like this. Flying foxes are considered to be the special children of the rainbow serpent, even though they're not really of the water, but they always set up their camp and sleep at night over either a spring or a billabong. At that same site, there are these figures that are blind lightnings. They have no eyes. The circle in the middle is their nose. They smell everything and they have 1 foot. And they went around the country naming it in the very beginning. But as you can notice here, they're painted or repainted over historical depictions of cows, I believe those are. They have horns, it looks like. There are other historical paintings or engravings here. This is a sailing ship. And Bill and others have said that this is the Aboriginal people just putting down what they had seen, that they thought was important. Pipes, hats, the positioning of the arms, equestrian figures. They're very happy that we now have this tool called D-Stretch by John Harmon, who has just revolutionized how rock art is recorded all over the world and makes it so much better to be able to bring out all the details for things like this. Bill was very impressed, and other elders as well, at how it brings back things that they say they remember it being that bright in their when they were younger, but it really is an incredible tool. John came up with just at the right time when we could still use it on so much of this faded stuff. This is a site that Bill uses to tell the story of how Bat killed Rainbow Serpent and tried to steal his wives. And you look at the paintings, and there is the figure on the right with the ears that is Bat, but there's nothing there that's a rainbow serpent. The figures that Bill says are the wives don't really look like birds. None of them look like birds, and yet the 2 wives are red-winged parrot and rainbow lorikeet. And there's Bat there. He put everybody to sleep and danced for them and put them all to sleep, killed Rainbow Serpent with a spear, chased after the girls. They ran off and he chased them across the countryside, finally caught up with them, and they drowned him in the river, and they were turned into nearby mountains. But there are other figures there that Bill didn't explain as part of that story. But this figure on the far left that has these 3 points on it is the fan that Bat used to wave the smoke over to people to put them to sleep. But Bill was careful to say that this thing can actually be used to tell a story having to do with a fan or a 3-part yam or a headdress, depending on what story you're telling. That same image can be all three. Nearby, you can see it from this side if you climb up on top a little ways, are the 2 twin sisters and Old Bat that were turned into features on the landscape after Bat chased them around the country. This is the rainbow serpent dreaming on Delamere Station in Wardaman Country, Uwarwale, where the Lightning Brothers fought. This is known as the Land of the Lightning Brothers, although Bill would prefer that people call it Land of the Lightning People, because the brothers are just two, is the way Bill sees it. The big painting near the depiction of the 2 brothers, the big painting on the left, you can see how high it is up the headdress goes way up high. These are all salts that are leaching through the rock from the water and obscuring the paintings. But the top of that headdress is like 20 some odd feet off the ground, I believe. The painting, you can reach it by climbing up on this other boulder, but he goes way down in the bottom. There's a picture of Bill. You can see on the left, going into the shadow, are the feet of that one brother. And Bill is, as I said earlier, is very well known as being a master painter. His paintings are hanging all over the world in galleries, and you can go online and find a whole bunch of them. This is a painting that Bill did of the fight between the Lightning Brothers. It's kind of not what you expect. Neither of the Lightning Brothers are depicted as being anthropomorphic, nor any of his wives, or they're part of their wives that are part of that story. The only anthropomorphic figure there is actually the little guy that's the frog that crawled up on the rock to pee down on the 2 brothers to cool them in the heat of the day while they could keep fighting. These are the Brolgas, cousins of our sandhill crane from back east. They, at the very first ceremony, they brought water to that very first ceremony so everyone could have a drink. And birds are depicted in a lot of different ways in Wardaman Country, in engravings and in paintings. And even in painted engravings. Here is a painting with more recent images showing a emu and a echidna, or an Australian porcupine, what we would call, depicted very, very naturalistically. Quite often they're much more stylized than this. There's also, as you can see, an equestrian figure there, another person with a hat, bunch going on there. Echidnas are much more often depicted like this. This is actually the short-nosed echidna. This is Willie Wagtail. He's a very flashy little bird. He's kind of like in the Dreamtime, he is kind of like our Coco Pelli. He's a scoundrel, a rascal. You don't want to let him come around the womenfolk, let's put it that way. He's depicted usually like this, very proudly with his tail sticking out. On our last year working over there, I believe, Brent headed into an area that Bill had sent him and came across this incredible depiction of a long-tailed pheasant. You can tell that it is because it has feet like our Roadrunner. They make the X track rather than the other track. And this one is very naturalistic and this incredible depiction of a centipede in its beak. The main story having to do with the Dreamtime world switching over into our world has to do with a creation dog that turned into a coyote, or turned into a dingo, excuse me, right, turned into dingoes as their world turned into ours. But he started out as a much bigger, more dangerous animal called the creation dog. There are other depictions here. This is one depiction of Moon in a dilly bag on the left over there, depiction of a falcon on the right here. These are lightning people. The striped figures are lightning people. Catfish, one of many different species of owls that are part of the creation stories. Other flying foxes, frog. This is a depiction of Moon at the main moon dreaming site. This is a depiction of the male aspect of the moon, actually. While we did not do full surface surveys, we did record all the artifacts in direct association with the art sites. And there were all kinds of very, very cool artifacts to record still out there. It's still an amazing, amazing place. They have edge ground stone axes. A lot of their tools are very expeditious, but they also have an awful lot of other tools that are beautifully, beautifully made, showing an incredible, even the expeditious tools show a lot of craftsmanship because they're made exactly the way they need to be made. But a lot of other ones require an awful lot of more careful little detail to serrated edges and things like that. We also recorded rock features, which are called stone arrangements over there. A lot of them in Arnhem Land, not that many in Wardaman Country, not that many in the places that we were in the Kimberley. But there were a few here in Arnhem Land. We'd run into some at several sites, but not many, not like we'd have here. There weren't house rings. That earlier rock ring was not a house ring like you might find around here. There were this one bunch of big boulders set up to have like seats on the top of a mesa with places you could rest your back on looking out across the country. Very cool place. This is a site that's becoming more and more famous. It's a site where old man Cockatoo is resting after all of the work that he did during the Dreamtime. There he is on the left laying down. But then over the top of these earlier paintings, these white paintings were made that are getting a lot of attention in the media now. And Bill was taught that this painting, it's a really good example of how Dreamtime stories can be conflated with historical stories, that it's a depiction of how the kangaroo people welcomed the first explorers into the country and shook their hand and said that the country was big enough for everybody, that they would share it, share their culture, share their country. The explorers just had to throw away their guns and that everybody could live together. The Walpry teacher, Wanta Stephen Patrick, when he saw this panel, felt that it was perhaps one of the most important rock art panels in Australia, and he really wanted to promote it and have more people learn about it. You can really learn about all the work that he's done, which is really revitalizing a lot of what's going on down in his country and all around, really. You can go online and find out about this. He and his father there. Here's a drawing that he made that shows these 5 pillars. I'm switching tracks a little bit here to talk about the Walpry people, but you can go online and find out about this Ngurra Kurlu teaching system that they've incorporated into their modern schools and other language groups are finding ways to incorporate it too. And these are like the pillars of their society, but it was pushed on us over and over to think of that these pillars are not the important part. The important part are the lines that connect all of these things together, that you should never, ever talk about any one of these without talking about all of them. And I think it's very interesting too that their word for language is also the word for water. So you can find out all about this Ngurra Kurlu, very fascinating stuff, by going online. And back again to Wardaman Country. Incredibly beautiful country. If you can take the time and stop and just breathe it all in. The Mengen Station is really the only community that's out on it at present time. And for the longest time, it used to be a cattle station that the Wardaman people with Bill and all these other elders were able to own, to able to actually buy back from the crown. And they've been running cattle for really all of Bill's life. He worked for the Vesties, the English company actually that was running cattle at the beginning, and then later worked it for various different other groups throughout time. I believe he worked for Vesties. They might have been over by then, I'm not sure. In more recent years, there's been a really big push to make a big chunk of their land the Wardaman Indigenous Protected Area, and protected as both a natural and a cultural reserve. And so in the years that we were going there, we went to probably 10 or 15 different meetings, sharing the work that we were doing with Bill, with everybody, really opening our eyes to understand just how important our work was to living people and the way they look at their connections to the land. And now and for quite a few years now, there's been the Wardaman Rangers out on country taking care of the sites, cleaning out the sites from all the overgrown brush, putting fences back up, dealing with invasive plants and species like wild pigs and some really, really horrible plants that have come in and caused big problems to the ecology there, but they're working on getting rid of them. Also, getting the children, the younger people, back out on country and introducing them to the relatives that they have in the other species that live there. These are not pictures of Wardaman people. These are Jawan folks in Catherine, where I forget which year it was, the cultural center was, after many, many years of planning and work, was finally put together and opened, and we got to be there for the opening. Many different groups up there really maintain their ceremonies and their songs, and see that as a focus that they have on going into the future, how their children have a future being who they are and being part of their land, rather than just being assimilated into the dominant culture of the invaders. At this point, I would also like to give a really big thank you to Susan Thickett and her husband Glenn for all their support to our work over the years. Without them, we would have probably only been able to do that 2 or maybe 3 years at most of field work. With their help, we were able to do 10, and we've been able to get out a lot of these reports and send them over back to the elders for their review. Don't know what we would have done without their help, but we certainly wouldn't have been able to get this done. In the 10 years that we were working with Bill, we were able to record 160 sites, but we were only able to get him to about 40 to 49 of them. These are the sizes of the sites. Some of them were as large as 200 panels. Excuse me. It wasn't just about the rock art. There's over 120 hours of videotape, and that included a bunch of other stories, song, language, mapping, lots of other traditional knowledge about trade and tool making and everything else. Here's the part where I ask for any kind of help. Anybody that is in a position to be able to help us, we can certainly use your help in trying to get more of these reports done. Excuse me. We have been able to get 13 of these done. At this point, each of these is just about one site. Sometimes it's nearly 200 pages. We have another 3 or 4 in the loop. We have 17 more total. We think that it'll take 30 volumes for us to put out all the information. If anyone can donate more than $50, I will send you as a present a copy of one of the reports. More than $100 donation, and I will send you a copy of this book that we put together. More for the general public, Shadows of the Dreaming. Here is all of our information for you to be able to get in touch with us. My email address is on the top there. We have a PayPal place on our website, or you can email me here. I think that that's just about the end of the talk. And we do the fade to black, and there's where I stop sharing, I think. There we go. Is that right? Am I still sharing or not?
True, you are not sharing.
Okay, good deal.
Excellent talk. Thank you very much.
Can
We'll
you show
open
us
up
that those addresses again, those email addresses, websites?
Well, you can find it all on our it's Western Rock Art Research is our webpage.
All right. I
And
had you years back. I've lost track, but I'll find you.
It'll have all that information there. Otherwise, I can give the information and you can put it on the PCAS website.
It'll go in the PC. Irene will see to that, I'm sure. But no, I'll find you online. Thank you.
Yeah, my website has my email address and everything there. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
There was one question in the chat. How are the sites protected from vandalism?
You are not allowed to visit them without a Wardaman guide, ever. That seems to work.
And I'll ask a follow-on. Are these easy to access, or are they way out in the country?
There are some that are around the station that they can take you to in a day. An awful lot of them take many, many hours, and you have to have a really, really good 4-wheel drive, and they're only accessible 2 to 3 months a year by vehicle.
Are there sites that, as a tourist, you could get to?
Yes, again,
Guided
you have to do that. There are a number that you can see up in the top end, but again, to go on to Wardaman Country, you have to have a Wardaman guide, and you need to contact the Wardaman people. Yep.
I'm raising my hand the old-fashioned way. This is a terrific talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really learned a lot. I'm very happy to hear you talking about context. I wrote my PhD dissertation on that back in the Upper Paleolithic era, and it didn't get any traction, let's put it that way. But I do think, this is a really good example of people are starting to try to meet rock art on its own terms rather than imposing this Eurocentric idea. I mean, the word art, first of all, is problematic. So I guess my question would be, with the women's and men's, the same site used for both women and men, was it different areas of the site, different images that they focused on, different times of day? I'm just trying to get a sense of how that worked out.
Well, the ceremonies take place at specific times. So all the men would know that it's the time for a woman's business to be going on there, and so they would avoid the place. I forget, there was a researcher, Karen Sands, who really did a huge amount of work, and I believe her work is online, showing how many sites were men, how many sites were women's, and how many sites were considered to be for both. And they are just as important to the women as they are to the men in terms of the punishments for stumbling onto a woman's site when you know you shouldn't, or stumbling onto a men's site when you know you shouldn't. That's one of the things that traditionally could be punishable by death, um, along with breaking skinship laws. Those are the ones that are really, really important for you not to break. And a funny thing about the word art is that the elders that I worked with have no problem with using the word art to describe this stuff. They have a problem with us calling it rock art because they say, you don't call that wall art in a museum. That's just art. Why would you, put this other tag onto rock art? They think it should just be called art. They call their sites art sites.
Mm.
So to them, they think that word is perfectly fine. It's just that our culture who uses the word art have never decided what exactly that is. Any 10 people will come up with 20 definitions of what art is. It has been my experience, at least. So I personally am really against calling it writing. I think that really sends
No,
the wrong
no, it's
message.
definitely, that's even worse than art.
Oh, wait, exactly. So
Yeah.
we're sort of stuck with it. All over the world, that's what we use. I sort of favored putting them both in capital letters, capital R, capital A,
Mhm.
as being this own particular thing. But again, the elders wouldn't agree with me on that. So I hope I explained that a little bit, that it would be different times. There's even a site where men showed up back in the Dreamtime and told women to leave a big site because they were coming through and they were going to have their ceremony. And the women said, well, no, we were here first and this is the time for our ceremony. And there was a big conflict, but it was the men who left and let the women do their ceremonies and they came back later. So um, they consider themselves to both be a very women's business and men's business to both be extremely important. For instance, women's business is a very important part of men's coming of age ceremonies. The boy goes to the women for a day and learns a lot from the women before he comes back to the men again. So they're considered to be really
Yeah.
interwoven. I hope that answers a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Yeah, so I've got three questions. Exactly what is skinship, and when did the Aborigines first come to Australia, and what is the age of the oldest rock art that you're comfortable saying?
Currently, I'll kind of work our way backwards a little bit. You might have to help me with the first couple of questions because
Okay.
that's my brain these days. Currently, I believe the oldest rock art that isn't argued over right now is about 39,000, 40,000, something like that. I believe they now have. There are a number of around 30, but I think they've taken that back to almost 40 now. People have been in Australia for, and I think it's closer to evidence now for 60 than 50,000 years. The Wardaman people, there's been some argument about whether they've only been in their country or their ancestors were only in their country for 15,000 years or much longer than that. And I think now the answer is probably much longer than that. So they know that country very, very well, and have for a very long time. And what was the third question? I'm sorry.
What is skinship?
Okay, skinships have to do with the marriage laws and how essentially half of everybody you cannot marry or have anything to do with members of the other sex, with half of everybody based on what their skin name is, and only half of them can you ever have any relations with or ever have children with. And it's a system that's been set up by elders, and actually most indigenous people all over the world have come up with something like that, to my knowledge anyway, as well, so that the people are not marrying too close. to each other is a big part of it, but it also gives people a place within society that, for instance, I'm Yidumduma. I was given the skin name of Yidumduma. When I introduce myself to any group of Aboriginal people, I tell them that, and right away they know how they should treat me. Because that was the name that was the skinship name that I was given. Without it, they really don't know how to treat you. And any woman would feel uncomfortable talking to me, not knowing what my skin name was. No other Aboriginal man would ever come up in a group of people or woman and not give their skin name to give everybody an idea of how they should interact.
Wow.
So, but it's a worldwide thing. It's something that goes on. I mean, we have something, pretty much every culture has some way to determine who you can and cannot marry.
Another question from the chat.
Yep.
Do you have any written reports of Mojave sites?
Papers, we publish papers in PCAS and in the Aurora volume and in the San Diego volume, but I don't have any. The other reports that we worked on were gray literature reports for the agencies.
And you mentioned way at the beginning, Granite Mountain report that you did on that.
Still very, very proud of that.
Another question from the chat. What is the process of overpainting? Do they match the US Southwest color sequence, like first black, then red, etc.?
No, not at all. Wardaman Country in particular is known for being where Rainbow Serpent was killed, and it has heaps and heaps of big hunks of really oily red ochre in the washes, and easy to find everywhere. And it's the main item that the Wardaman people were known to be trading in all different directions, to the Kimberley, to Arnhem Land, and to the Red Center for various other things that they used in ceremony. And the overpainting is the way, because I'm only really dealing with the knowledge that Bill learned from his ancestors. And if you think about it, it was only from about 1890 something until the 1960s. Aboriginal people in Australia were not given citizenship until 1967 or 68. And they still don't have their own autonomy to this day. They're still fighting to have their own autonomy and be able to make their own decisions on land that they own. So everything isn't, I purposely left out an awful lot of depressing things I could have talked about what's going on up there. I'm sorry, I chased a rabbit there. What was the question again?
Process of overpainting. Do they paint one color first, then another, then the third?
No. Well, I wasn't there for when they were, the repainting that was done in the 80s. They obviously were doing all the white and then reached a point where they had done some of the yellow and done some of the red, and done some of the black, but then in doing the white, they ran out of time and they stopped, and they have not been able to go back because you have to walk there from site to site in the wet. You can't drive. They can go in on a helicopter, but those particular ceremonies have to be done during the wet. They can only be done during the wet. So they haven't been able to go back in there, the elders, to take the children back in since they've changed over to cars. The repainting for Bill's generation, he and his cousin, which were the only ones who lived to that age to be able to do it, were told by their elders to repaint one site that they felt needed to be upgraded, to take it back to the brightness that it had been, to bring happiness to the country and make those spirits that have to do with that site happy about the fact that you're still taking care of it, you're still caring for country. But as far as I know, there wasn't any, if there is, I wasn't told it anyway. Excuse me.
Yeah. And I've got a question about Bill the person. What is his background? Where did he come by the knowledge, education? Is that typical, or is he somehow got more than most?
I don't know for sure, but I have a feeling most of them I mean, all the traditional people speak many different languages. Bill speaks at least, well, he told us he spoke 6. Then we found out that no, there was another one, and so that makes it 7 that he's completely fluent in. Pretty much all the elders speak at least 4 or 5 languages, every one of them, including English now. So, and it's the same thing with, we really have a huge misconception to think that, oh, their life was so simple and ours is so complex. No, actually, they had science, they had medicine, they had a huge belief system and laws. You know, they make this thing out, well, you know, we invented laws. No, we did not. They have a very, very intricate and complex system of laws that you're supposed to live by, duties that you're supposed to fulfill in your life to become a full Wardaman man or woman. And this thing that we make out that they could just wander out every day and pick whatever they came across is nothing like reality. The level of knowledge that Bill has that he can access and it's compartmentalized in his mind is astounding. I frankly have never met any professor, and I've been lucky enough to hang out around some incredibly intelligent people that I just sit there with my mouth hanging open when I hear them talking to each other because they're so far over my head. I've never met anybody whose mind is as disciplined as Bill's is. And that mapping really drove it home that I don't know anybody. Sit down and write down the names of all the streets that you can think of in your town. For Bishop, I bet there's not 20 that I could come up with at best. He was able to do 300 sites, and he said that's because I'm sitting here in a room. I could double or triple the number of sites if we were out walking on the country. So I really think that the level of knowledge that most people had, now his knowledge was increased because of how much the elders focused on him, particularly Jojo Monji, his one stepfather that was a boundary watcher that really nailed that down. But there's every aspect of the plants and animals, fish. Bill can talk about it throughout the season. He was able to give us to go back in time he was talking about a giant storm that happened in 1971. He told us what the weather was like that year and then came forward just about almost every big storm year since then until the present time. I don't know about you, but I really can't even go back 3 or 4 years myself. So I consider the man to be the most intelligent person I've ever met, frankly, in terms of how much he can access.
Yeah.
And he's in his mid 90s right now. So traditionally, right now, very few Wardaman men live out of their 50s, and other Aboriginal men in the top end. Most of them do not live out of their 50s.
Okay, thank you.
Any other
And
questions?
I see Marilyn, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering why he wanted to share all this with you. And I'm wondering if it might have the importance of the not having their lives, their culture come to an end, that he wanted to be able to spread it to other people. What do you think?
That's exactly right. He spent, before he started doing his touring business to these sites, some of these sites in the 80s, he went around to all the other elders and had a lot of pushback of people saying, we don't want you sharing this stuff with outsiders. And he said, okay, well, we're not really sharing it all the way we used to and should be doing. We're going to lose a lot of this knowledge if we don't. And he was very adamant and was the whole time with us that he was not sharing any of the stuff that is considered to be sacred by men. And he was not sharing any of the stuff of women's business with us, obviously. So all that he was sharing with us and that he shares with people on the tours is stuff that was accessible to uninitiated men and women, Wardaman men and women before, as stuff that was pertaining to the whole community. And so basically what he and other elders told me is that they're very happy for I and other people to be giving talks. You can go online and learn a lot about the Wardaman people, because they just want the rest of the world to know about the Wardaman people. I certainly don't believe their culture is going to end. I have a feeling that our culture is more likely to end than theirs, and theirs will keep going. As a person who married an Aboriginal person once told me on a tour, he said, we've been trying to kill off the Aboriginal people. In 1950, it was a given that they would be dead by the end of the century, and they're back now, just like Native Americans, more than they were since we originally took them out in the beginning. He said, we've been trying to kill them. They poisoned them, blew them up, shot them, did everything, and they're still there. He said, you know what it would take for us to stop modern culture? Just one finger. Just turn off the lights. That's all you'd have to do, and our culture stops. They would just go out and go back to hunting kangaroo and emu. So they don't see themselves as ending going forward. They see us as probably ending going forward.
Thank you very much.
How many of the children leave the area?
Not that many that leave the general area. They're not living out on country anymore. They're in town. But and I can't say for sure because I don't really know, but around the Catherine to Darwin area, there's around, or were, I don't know what the numbers are now, around 2,000 people or so who call themselves Wardaman people. But I don't believe there are any living in America.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah. Hearing none, I'll thank everybody for attending. Mr. Lee, thank you very much. A very good talk. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you all very much.
What a great talk.
Quick commercial for our next meeting, November 14th. We have David Nichols. His talk is going to be Managing Cultural Resources at Mojave National Preserve. He is the preserve's archaeologist. Looking forward to that talk on November 14th. Thank you very much, everybody. Careful
Everybody
driving
have a
home.
great night. Thank you, Dave.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.